Hello. In this video, I want to reply to the overall consensus of the comments. And I think in the overall consensus, like a game of Tetris, the piece that it's one of those 3 blocks with the 1 block below it in the middle facing down, I've been trying to move it which way in that. And it seems to, if I bring it down, meet here at this point of what do we mean by contemplation? And then by contrast, what are we not referring to when we contemplate? And the first thing I want to rudely shove off the table is in a manner of speaking, rudely, is Descartes' metaphysics. What I mean by that is the following. To take a lasso and tie it around Person and Eros by Christos Yannaras, which is what most of these videos have been about, and pull him back in. He said something that he cites the church fathers as also saying, Christian church fathers. And it's something that as you unpeel the onion, you take off that brown outer center that has no taste, and it was necessary and it's there, but you take it off and you start to see this young, fresh onion that brings a tear to your eye. And you have to now chop it into pieces and maybe even throw it onto a hot surface and brown it, and then make it almost imperceptible in the dish that you're creating. And yet without it, like a good bass tone, there would be no cadence. What am I trying to say with all this? Again, I'm convoluted. Things are not what they appear at first glance, or even second or third, but if we stick and persevere to the process and stay within our lanes, what can meet us at the end and what meets us along the way is worth the travel, the hassle, even though it may not seem like it at the time. Christos Yannaras, in citing the church fathers, in developing his philosophical system for personhood, makes a powerful distinction between person and nature. Or in the Greek, if it's more comfortable, one might say hypostasis, hypostasis. Take that word apart. We love to do that on this channel because the primitive use of words, the etymological root of things that we just so easily slap on the toast and that's butter, right? Watch it melt. That's how we use our alphabet day after day in ordinary usage. But if we slow down and aesthetically, I don't need that butter, but there's nothing wrong with butter, but maybe toast is enough today. Why? Because I want to deprive myself out of some ill-founded sense and basis of guilt? No, because there's a lot more to bread than what the butter covers up. So if we take apart that word hypostasis, it's 2 parts, and it's where the Latin translation of the thing, as the West met the East and they talked to each other at the table of world culture, they translated, they pulled, they reached over and took that hypostasis and brought it into substance. You see that move. Substacks, subcutaneous, stand, the stand under. So here's what you see, what supports it. Supports it. Port from portal, gate in Latin. So what opens it to view now? Well, certainly it's the walls of the gate which support the trellis. It's not this abstract theory of gravity from Newton. It's that actual gate and its actual physics, which is the Greek word for nature, natura in Latin. So you see they're at the table. They're sharing the salt and pepper. They might be arguing over measurements, but they're at the same table. Now, I'm not saying they're saying the same thing, because behind every word is an intention. And sometimes a word in common usage in a society amongst brothers and sisters, amongst families and friends and acquaintances, and out there in the periphery to the stranger, we might not mean the same thing or intend the same thing by the word, even though the word has a history. And it might be easier to assume that that person over there is using this word with the same intention that my brother and my sister and my aunt and my uncle and my grandfather used it. But what if they're not? And another level, what if they're shaping the word unintentionally or for an intention we didn't see coming? These things, they sound a little exciting, but they're right there in the middle of translation work. So translation's this dry and academic subject. At this point, I'm going to read from Henry James that I teased earlier as I make this point about the dry and the academic. Where is this beautiful passage? I'm going somewhere with this. Beautiful passage. We're almost there. Here it is. Yeah. You don't need the context. Just listen to the rhythm, not the rhythm, just listen to the words that Henry James uses in this book, The Ambassadors. He's describing someone sitting by a fire. This relates to the dry and the academic. She was seated near the fire on a small stuffed and fringed chair, one of the few modern articles in the room, and she leaned back in it with her hands clasped in her lap and no movement. In all her person, but the fine, prompt play of her deep young face. The fire under the low white marble, undraped and academic, had burnt down to the silver ashes of light wood. One of the windows at a distance stood open to the mildness and stillness, out of which in the short pauses came the faint sound, pleasant and homely, almost rustic, of a plash and clatter of sabots from some coach house on the other side of the court. I should have kept that page because we'll be going back to it. Translation work is more like the fire in that fireplace with the light wood sunk into ash than it is the marble surrounding and supporting its place in the house. A line from Alfred Lloyd Tennyson in his poem Ulysses. This is a part from it, a part of the stanza. All experience is an arch wherethrough gleams that untraveled world whose margin fades forever and forever when I move. All experience is an arch wherethrough gleams that untraveled world whose margin fades forever. And here we slow down and he puts a space in the middle of forever. F-O-R space E-V-E-R. Whose margin fades forever, one word, and forever, two words, when I move. You can see this person inside the structure looking out through the arch, and then he takes a step forward, which is outside, a movement towards the outside of the structure. And as he does that into this untraveled world, because it's out there, It has no room in the domain of the structure. As he steps out, the margin, which is now the world meeting the side of this support, which is the arch, begins to fade. This is the relation in a relation from the earlier videos. Remember how Christos Yannaras started not with a metaphysical point, not with a myth. Something Jordan Peterson has been going, this video, as this video sequence goes on, I'm starting to feel as if in a swimming pool, I used to live in an apartment where there was a pool. You go down the staircase that's into the water, and then you're at the 3 feet, and it's nice, it's fine. You can relax, you could stand up. But you see at the end of the pool, you can walk, and then you go up to your neck, and now you have to begin moving your hands. You have to become something that isn't walking in order to make it. You have to start swimming, which is a motion proper to this structure known as the pool. When you're out in the world, you don't have to swim. But when you're in the pool, eventually, near the midpoint, you have to begin adapting to the environment. Otherwise, you have to turn back. Now, if it asked you to fly, then you wouldn't have a chance within your nature to adapt to it. That's why we don't swim. That's why we don't fly in the air. We only do it through and in this contraption that acts as if there is no sky, namely a plane, because a plane can just as well go down a ramp, go down a road as it could fly in the sky. But swimming is different. Now, where was I going with that? Jordan Peterson often talks about life as a story. And he uses that to talk about how in our perception, we unconsciously head towards a value until we come across an error, an anomaly that requires us either to begrudgingly go forward or to change something about our perception of the world. And he leaves it a question mark whether or not this actually affects the world, or if it's something sealed tight within us that we are making little modulations to. And certainly as a psychologist, he would be interested in the latter, but as a clinical psychologist, he extends it to the former. He cares about people's relationships with their friends and family and significant partners, etc. in the wider world. He believes in an external society. And then he brings in evolutionary theory and all that. But with Christ, and he puts it under the Greek word pragmatism. Well, Christos Yannaras begins his book Person and Eros with the starting point of a Latin word, relation. And he says the thing about relation is you're in a relation relationally. And I hinted at that in the previous video. And forgive me, I know I'm going everywhere with this, but an example would be helpful. And then we'll come to that last part of Henry James and we'll be done. Here we're going to side into Jonathan Peugeot. If the university has moved on to the internet, then as you would walk down a library and try to read from section to section slowly, and this takes time, and as you read book after book after book, you begin to have a conversation. That is to say, as you're reading a line from a book 5 aisles down, somehow in this particular book, in the middle of a sentence, springs forth a memory, a way that a previous author down the shelf has phrased it. And now you're no longer reading a book, you're reading 2 books in one. You're bringing the past into the present, or the past is revealing itself through the present, or the present is, as it were, reinterpreting your past. Who knows? Does it matter? The fact is you're having a rich simultaneous experience of multiple registers. And I think that's why Peterson is moving into the language of harmony and music from his evolutionary prior stance. I'm not saying he's, as it were, taking that backpack off of Darwinian evolution to try to arrive at the external world, but I think he's becoming a little more Neoplatonic in his idea of ascent, with this idea that there's room for everybody simultaneously. And certainly music brings that out. I tried to be in a chorus last weekend, and I was standing there, and I found myself not with the tenors or the sopranos. I went down to the continuum of the bass, and there were two other gentlemen. And I don't read music. I didn't sing in high school or middle school or elementary school. I shouted in a sixth grade play as a character, but that was shouting, that wasn't singing. At any rate, there I was trying to find my way, and the teacher said, listen, have one ear listening to yourself and the other ear listening to your partner so that you can find your pitch together. And I was trying to do that, and my partner kept doing this or doing this, go up, go down, because I didn't know what I was doing. So I eventually came to my senses and, as it were, saw that the light bulb was not turning on and stopped. And I listened to these people, and they were wonderful. And they were all going together, the bass and the soprano and the alto, and they were stacking, ranking without competition. And it opened my eyes and ears to the experience of music, to the quality of music. And so I like where Peterson's going in this direction by making it a controlling metaphor. But now with Peugeot, so Peugeot came shortly after Peterson. And one of the things Peugeot talks about now and again is the experiential basis of symbolism. And with the experience of the symbol, he will every now and again, like popcorn thrown at the movie theater screen, say phenomenology, phenomenology, phenomenology. Well, if I were to sit next to him in the movie theater, I would throw the Sour Patch Kid of reduction. So phenomenological reduction. This is a technique that came over from Europe at the turn of the 20th century through Edmund Husserl and his student Martin Heidegger, and later practitioners closer to our contemporary moment, Jean-Luc Marion, and not that he would be identified with these figures, but I would say his thinking is, what's that word, simpatico with, or it makes some melody with Christos Yannaras. So what is the phenomenological reduction? It's the attempt, with the whole scholastic enterprise behind us, to ask the deep questions about reality and our experience of reality as what we are, whatever we are, without resorting to definitions. Pre-packaged, the rice goes, toothbrushes. There's nothing wrong with necessities. But is that what we're here for? To stake everything on common, ordinary, daily usage, that the moment you start to poke it, you see how highly fragile it is. The whole talk of infrastructure and solar flares taking out electricity, and how we couldn't go and read Shakespeare in the original. We wouldn't understand it, even though it's English. All these things show how fragile the ordinary, the common, the everyday, in fact, is. Although while you're living it, it doesn't seem fragile at all. It couldn't, otherwise you wouldn't be able to endure it. So when we're going to ask these deep questions, why not take into account our asking the question, the very fact of the fragility of our current environment? That's what the phenomenologists, starting with Husserl, I would say, explicitly said. And so they said, back to the phenomena, back to the phenomena. Don't tell me substance. Don't tell me hypostasis. Don't tell me person. Start with the fact. And this is not the sort of fact of these things don't care about your feelings, it's empiricism. No. It's the fact of the following. And then I'll use this to define the phenomenological reduction, and then we'll go to Henry James and we'll be done because we're already at 20 minutes. The fact to the phenomenologist is the following. Isn't it funny? Isn't it strange when you stop and think about it, how if you were to stop everything you're doing and look at something, you can't do it for very long. It becomes something you sink into or you kind of move away from. It starts to quaver. It's a little weird. It's a little, my goodness, this is my hand. And then it's imperceptibly moves from my hand to I can't deal with it anymore. And you look away to something else, momentarily distracted, diverted. And we do this all day. We do it all night. Our eyes move even when we're asleep, constantly darting, not settling. Is this a bad or good thing? We're not bringing a judgment into it. As the phenomenologists would say, we're noticing how not we size things up, but how the very act of gazing at something. I'm not talking about looking at it and then looking away, looking at it and looking away, giving it a glance, blah, blah, blah. Even notice that language of glance, brushing. But looking at it straight and then enduring it, gazing at it, things start to peel away. And at the same time, things present themselves as very real, undefined. This, the phenomenologists would say, is the constituting of the gaze, or the reconstitution of the object through the gaze. And the weird thing about it, or the questionable aspect, is why can't we do this permanently? Why do we do it after a fashion, in a drift, momentarily, if at all? Socrates might say, the ungazed at life is not worth living, instead of the unexamined. I don't know the answer to that question. I don't. But the phenomenologist asked it for the last 100 years, 120 years. Martin Heidegger certainly asked it in Being and Time, essentially saying, give it time and being will present itself in all its temporality that matters for Dasein, the being there. And so when you start to see it from a very simple angle, that these phenomenologists are reducing to what is there before you in the constitution of your gaze until you can't bear it anymore and you look away. Those little quiet moments are all they're talking about. Whether it's Jean-Paul Sartre's Being in Nothingness, Martin Heidegger's Being in Time, Husserl's philosophical investigations or ideas, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And I think in the same way, although slightly different, with a different bias, Christos Yannaras is asking or responding to the same phenomenon. Now, he will say that he'll use a fancy word, recapitulation. And yeah, I feel like I don't really want to say anything more about that. I feel like I've said all I want to say now. The rest would kind of be forcing it. And it's already 24 minutes. Thank you for your attention and time. I will read that part of Henry James just because it's so beautiful. And he will say in the artifact more than I could say with another 10 minutes trying to find my thoughts. So here it is. Let's see. It's a powerful scene. Okay. Strether was silent a little. Then he found himself speaking with a cynicism of confidence, of which, even at the moment, the sources were strange to him. I try to believe it, but it's a marvel, he exclaimed, how you already get at it. Oh, she was able to say, remember how much I was on the way to it through Mr. Newsom before I saw you. He thinks everything of your strength. Well, I can bear almost anything, our friend briskly interrupted. Deep and beautiful on this, her smile came back, and with the effect of making him hear what he had said just as she had heard it. He easily enough felt that it gave him away, but in truth had everything done but that. It had been all very well to think at moments that he was holding her nose down and that he had coerced her. What had he by this time done but let her practically see that he accepted their relation? What was their relation, moreover? Though light and brief enough in form as yet, but whatever she might choose to make it, nothing could prevent her, certainly he couldn't, from making it pleasant. At the back of his head, behind everything, was the sense that she was there, before him, close to him, in vivid imperative form, one of the rare women he had so often heard of, read of, thought of, but never met, whose very presence, look, voice, the mere contemporaneous fact of whom, from the moment it was at all presented, made a relation of mere recognition. That was not the kind of woman he had ever found Mrs. Newsom, a contemporaneous fact, who had been distinctly slow to establish herself, and at present confronted with Madame de Vionnet, he felt the simplicity of his original impression of Miss Gostrey. She certainly had been a fact of rapid growth, but the world was wide. Each day was more and more a new lesson. There were, at any rate, even among the stranger ones, relations and relations. Of course I suit Chad's grand way, he quickly added. He hasn't had much difficulty in working me in. She seemed to deny a little, on the young man's behalf, by the rise of her eyebrows, an intention of any process at all inconsiderate. You must know how grieved he'd be if you were to lose anything. He believes you can keep his mother patient. Strether wondered, with his eyes on her. I see. That's, then, what you really want of me. And how am I to do it? Perhaps you'll tell me that. Simply tell her the truth. And what do you call the truth? Well, any truth about us all that you see yourself. I leave it to you. Thank you very much. I like, Strether laughed with a slight harshness, the way you leave things. But she insisted kindly, gently, as if it wasn't so bad. Be perfectly honest. Tell her all. All? He oddly echoed. Tell her the simple truth, Madame de Vionnet again pleaded. But what is the simple truth? The simple truth is exactly what I'm trying to discover, the phenomenologists say as well. Henry James wrote this in the 20th century. She looked about a while, but presently she came back to him. Tell her fully and clearly about us. Strether, meanwhile, had been starting. You and your daughter? Yes, little Jeannie and me. Tell her, she just slightly quavered, you like us. And what good will that do me? Or rather, he caught himself up. What good will it do you? She looked graver. None, you believe, really? Strether debated. She didn't send me out to like you. He was from Massachusetts. The woman referred to sent him across the Atlantic Ocean to Paris to find the woman from Massachusetts' son who had left. And he met these people that Strether, the main character, is now confronting Will he ask for the son to come back with him to Massachusetts? Will he not? That's why this book is called The Ambassadors. It's a work of art. Oh, she charmingly contended. She sent you out to face the facts. He admitted after an instant that there was something in that. But how can I face them till I know what they are? Do you want him? He then braced himself to ask, to marry your daughter? She gave a headshake as noble as it was prompt. No, not that. And he really doesn't want to himself? She repeated the movement, but now with a strange light in her face. He likes her too much. Strether wondered. To be willing to consider, you mean, the question of taking her to America? To be willing to do anything with her but be immensely kind and nice, really tender of her. We watch over her, and you must help us. You must see her again. Strether felt awkward. With pleasure. She's so remarkably attractive. The mother's eagerness with which Madame de Vonnet jumped at this was to come back to him later as beautiful in its grace. The dear thing did please you. Then, as he met it with the largest oh of enthusiasm, she's perfect. She's my joy. Well, I'm sure that if one were near her and saw more of her, she'd be mine. Then, said Madame de Vonnet, tell Mrs. Newsome that. He wondered the more. What good will that do you? As she appeared unable to say at once, however, he brought out something else. Is your daughter in love with our friend? She rather startlingly answered. I wish you'd find out. He showed his surprise. I? A stranger? Oh, you won't be a stranger. Presently. You shall see her quite, I assure you, as if you weren't. It remained for him none the less an extraordinary notion. It seems to me surely that if her mother can't, little girls and their mothers today, she rather inconsequently broke in. But she checked herself with something she seemed to give out as, after all, more to the point. Tell her I've been good for him. Don't you think I have? It had its effect on him, more than at the moment he quite measured. Yet he was consciously enough touched. Oh, if it's all you, well, it may not be all, she interrupted, but it's to a great extent, really and truly, she added in a tone that was to take its place with him among things remembered. So that's enough for now. Philosophical books take time, and philosophical explanations take even longer. Have a good day.